Select your program.
Philosophy.
Program initiated.
Approach the threshold. Engage rationality. Open your mind. Godspeed.
I just want to start a flame in your heart.
Beaming down to your listening devices through the ether, this is Flagship Freedom, the podcast that places you in the front line in the war of ideas. My name is Michael.
And I am Danny Boy.
And welcome back to this, our humble podcast, where we are talking about today a very fundamental, oh so important topic, and that is the basics of economics. This is a topic that I think everyone has their own opinions about economics, and everyone is an economist. But what we're going to be talking about is really a stripped down examples of the economics of libertarianism. What informs libertarian ethics? Economics is a linchpin, sort of the sister or sibling of the ethics of libertarianism. And before we get further into this subject, I would like to do something a little different and entertain my storytelling nature. So Danny, I'm not sure if you will indulge me.
Yay, story time.
Okay, gather in my children. Danny boy, we are going to be placing you deep within a desert island. In fact, it's a beautiful island. You know, the breeze is blowing palm trees and the water is lapping up the coast, and it's a very natural resource-filled island, and as far as you know, there's no one else but you, and you're there by yourself and your wit and your education, your knowledge, and it is your time to figure out what to do. And I imagine, you being rather hungry and thirsty and needing some shelter, you're going to go find all that stuff, right?
Ooh, mamma mia, me likey so much. Yeah.
Right.
I'll just crack some coconuts.
Yeah, so are you a big fan of coconuts?
They're okay.
All right. So, okay, let's say, I mean, you know, that's all you can find right now. And, you know, coconuts are fairly easy to crack. Take a rock and crack them open. So you got some food. What else are you going to do?
Play Xbox or something, I think.
You're cheating. That's not necessarily a resource that is here present on the island.
Oh. Okay, I guess I would start by making my own clothes.
Okay. So this is assuming that you are as naked as Adam. That is what you would do. All right, so you've got some food, you've got some clothes. What else?
Probably have to dig myself a little hut or something, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Protect yourself from the elements, even though it's a really nice island and the weather's great all the time. All right, so you've got a hut, you've got some food, you've got clothing. Let's just assume that you found some water too. Yep, the water's a little brackish, but, you know, you throw it back. Okay, so you've got some of your basic functions taken care of. As time goes by, you learn pretty well how long it takes to do all these things, right? So you got a schedule. You wake up, you crack some coconuts, you get some water. Maybe you're doing some exploring, huh?
Pretty much probably spending 100% of your time surviving.
Right, yeah. Now, over a period of time, because I'd say you're a pretty smart guy, Danny, you start to learn how to collect resources, and you get better and better at it. You know, you are a coconut cracking machine. In fact, I would say you figure it out so well that you decide that you are able to make tools that make the job even quicker, just because you know where the water is and you've got shelter, which, you know, that took time to create, but now and you got to repair it now and again, but you're able to crack a bunch of coconuts, and maybe you can create a little bit of a surplus. Now, I'm going to throw a wrench into all this and say that when you're on your exploration, you actually discover me. I'm on the island too. You've got some company. Isn't that fantastic?
Rats.
I'm sorry to hear that you are disappointed in my company, but nevertheless, for the sake of the story and because I'm not that miserable company, thank you, Danny, I've been doing a lot of the same stuff that you have So, I've been cracking coconuts, but let's say I also have found some mangoes, because mangoes are a nice tropical fruit, and who knows where we are. So we could be on an island indigenous to that. And I am really good at peeling mangoes. I'm not quite as good at cracking coconuts, and you've created a tool, but I know how to open up mangoes. Now, you, with all of the time that you've spent, have been able to build up a surplus of coconuts, and I have been able to build up a small surplus of mangoes, and I also have a skill that you don't have too. So we decide to talk, and, what do? I mean, are you willing to trade a couple coconuts for my mangoes?
Absolutely.
Right. So I think right now we can pause the story and go over a couple of things that we've observed. Danny, what do you think my story has to do with economics?
I think you're getting into specialization and comparative advantage.
All right. But even further, even taking a step back, I want to address some of the basic principles of economic. And yes, you're right, specialization is one of the things that we can derive from the story, and comparative advantage as well. But what about even something a little bit further, even more basic? And that's the idea that resources are scarce. Our time is limited, so we have certain opportunity costs to do certain things as well. That's the second thing, that there are costs, opportunity costs, and we as rational human beings, and this is another sort of fundamental assumption that economists provide, is that people are rational beings, that they will choose based off of reasons, and they don't do things necessarily on a whim. Now, that doesn't mean that we necessarily agree or with what somebody views as a valuable use of their time or their resources as a representation of the labor that they worked, but it's important to assume that these people understand what they're doing, because we ourselves have an understanding that we are rational too, and that we make decisions based off of that. So I would say that's another very, very important thing. And then what you touched upon was the idea of trade, and what is trade? I mean, what's like a really easy way to define trade?
Trade, you have something I want, I have something you want. We both agree to give up something, and this is the foundational central truth, in my opinion, to capitalism and economics and free markets in general, is that it's win-win, because otherwise neither of us would participate, or only one of us would want to participate in this transaction. So in your mango coconut example, or in any trade, why would anyone participate if they didn't believe, at least, that they were going to be made better off as a result? So it's the win-win nature of trade as opposed to the win-lose nature of coercion and theft, etc.
Right. So when we are doing a little bit of trading, you, as a rational human being, must value what I have to offer. In fact, you don't just value it, but you value it over the ownership that of your couple coconuts, because let's say it's a 1-to-1 trade. I'm trading one coconut, or I'm trading one mango for one of your coconuts. So you must value that, not just an equal valuation, because then why would you do that? I mean, no one trades things that are equal. They want to be better off after the trade. So you value that mango more than you value one of the coconuts. Would I be saying that correctly?
Exactly. Yeah. Otherwise it'd be pointless.
Right. So this is a basic assumption of economics, that, if I have a pencil and you have a pen, and let's say you want to write more permanently than so that I want to write more permanently than I can with my pencil, and you want to be able to do sketches and make corrections to whatever you're writing, we would make that trade too. So whatever that might be, whether that be, let's say, since we are rational human beings and we have items in which other people might not, we might make a trade. And that's a really basic principle of economics. But it also links back to what we've talked about in previous discussions, philosophy episodes. And this is the libertarian notion of voluntary action, voluntary agreement, voluntary contracts. Basically, every action that we take, unless that it is in self-defense, must be a voluntary action, meaning I, as the owner of my body, must be willing to do it freely. So you can't come up to me and coerce me or threaten violence upon me to take my coconut, that would be a violation of the non-aggression principle, but that wouldn't necessarily be trade anymore, would it? That would be theft. And we know about theft, don't we?
Exactly. So to sort of put a cap on this one module, I think what you're saying is that for trade to occur, both parties must benefit in their own mind, and to bring it back to the voluntaryism aspect, only the individual, because value is subjective and each person has their own desires in life. Like I might value art or music or guns or entertainment or travel or whatever. Everybody has their own preferences in life. Only the individual can make that decision, right? Of course, who knows better how to spend your money than you in terms of bringing value to your life? So that's to sort of round it off. That's actually, in my opinion, the most important and really the bedrock of free trade capitalism. That as long as you're not coercing somebody into a situation like a mugger, right? They can say like your wallet or your life, and you could argue, oh well, it's voluntary because he chose to give me his wallet, right? So we're saying absent the threat of force, any voluntary trade benefits both parties because they both benefit. I'm getting myself in a tongue twister. They both benefit, otherwise they wouldn't engage in it in the first place, according to both of their subjective value preferences.
Right. And what you're referring to is something called the subjective theory of value. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, as Danny said, different people hold different values for different things. And this can be affected by time, the idea of time preference, delaying the gratification of resources gained by committing labor to it. Or it can be affected by location, disposition, taste, etc. You and I both need water to live, but at different points in time do we need them. So perhaps I've already drank and you have water and I have food, but you haven't eaten. Well, I guess I said that I've already drank, but let's say you have food and you haven't drank. We can trade those things, even though they are necessities for human life, human existence, food and water. They aren't necessities at any given time for a particular individual. So even on the basic, the necessities of human existence, we still have the idea that time affects preferences, and therefore the valuation of those particular preferences, those desires, are different.
If I could, you brought up an interesting point. I'd like to just jump down a tangent real quick.
Yeah.
One criticism communists will make is that trade is not voluntary if your alternative is starvation. They say, well, that's actually a form of coercion because if my options are to work or to starve, that's not really a choice. I have to do it, otherwise I'm going to die. But of course, the capitalist response is that the imposition of hunger and the need to work is present under any circumstance whatsoever. If you are a biological organism on this planet, you need to work. That's not a condition imposed by capitalism. That's a condition imposed by nature. So no capitalist, no person is forcing you to work for them. They are simply offering you a better alternative to starving. So that's one of the most annoying criticisms I ever hear is, well, it's not really a choice. I have to live in a house, right? Well, no, you actually don't. In this world, nobody really owes you anything. I'm sorry to say it, but if it were just you on this planet, on that desert island, life would be pretty harsh. And that's not capitalism's fault. That's nature.
Right, yeah. It would be really irrational to say if you were on this desert island and, it's a beautiful island, there's resources aplenty, but you can't just say, you scream out angrily at the sky or to no one, give me food. You have to go and find it. You have to work in order to get these sorts of things. So whether or not there is even governance, this is a basic fact of human existence, that we don't have photosynthesis. We can't just sit out and take resources from the air or the sun. in the rain. We have to go and we have to actually work to get these resources. So,
Mr. Mike, I wonder if I may steer the conversation. You tell me what you think. Why is this important? Why do we care? And of course, most importantly, why is the state, the government, interfering in the economy? Or I should say, why is the government existing? How is that a departure from capitalism? Or where does the conflict come in, right? Because this is all fine and dandy. I think everybody understands trade for the most part. But how does this concern modern day society? Why is it important to us? And why are we not in a scenario of free trade?
Well, there are many, many different examples of reasons why we are not in a system of complete and perfect free trade. And one of the biggest examples, and the reason why there is sort of a wrench thrown into the machine, is the state. The state is an institution that has been provided for us, or however you might say, people coming together in an agreement of governance at first. And, it's grown and grown and grown to the point where not everybody that lives within the state does agree with what is going on. The state has been created so that we, at the bare minimum, have protection from, each other and foreign bodies, that we have roads, and that, that we cannot create monopolies of power so that we can exploit other people for our whims. But of course, this becomes a contradiction in of itself, because the same Leviathan that we employ to protect us from doing all these things has gained a life of its own, and now has interjected into itself into even basic factors of human existence, such as trade. So when the government says, give me your money because you've traded with one another, well, the government isn't necessarily a party to this trade. I didn't agree upon paying money to the government because the government's using it for this and that and the other thing. The government's going off and fighting foreign wars, and it's fighting wars here at home against drugs. This is not a voluntary trade. I have not agreed upon the trade of my money, which is the fruit of my labor, to the government for whatever kind of ills they are saying that they are doing. And this is a fundamental issue, and this is where the meme-tastic phrase "taxation is theft" comes about.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to challenge you on this. Play devil's advocate. Don't you benefit from those government services? So how can it be theft if you're benefiting from them in the first place?
You can benefit from things and not agree to them, and it might be a very, very good benefit. And, it's often the case where people might receive a sort of a splash effect of whatever kind of service is being provided. This is what is it called? Non-exclusionary value? Is that what it's called?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I believe that economists call
public
things...
good?
Well, right. Well, a public good, sure. But I think that there is a term, and I'll put it in the show notes afterwards, in which we describe benefits that we receive, but we did not pay for. So that might be, let's say, we pay for roads, for instance, but if roads existed, we would benefit from them if a society created them, unless, of course, we paid into them. So just if, a society creates something, some type of good in which everyone can use, their expectation from the society is that you're going to be paying into that. But if I didn't say, yes, I agree to use whatever resource that is, then it can still be considered theft if somebody goes knocking on your door and says, well, you know what, you're going to benefit from this thing, or you are already benefiting, and I'm going to take this arbitrary amount, and it's justified because I'm providing you the service and you simply haven't, agreed to it. But I'm doing the work for it, so I feel like I deserve to come and take your stuff.
So in other words, you can't possibly know how much somebody values something unless you afford them the option to opt out of your trade.
Precisely, yeah. It's very, very difficult for the government to know. we do know in some instances how much things would cost, because not only do we have a semblance of a free market, so the government can bid competitively in some instances where there are free market options. But in a society where things are publicly owned, we have a different and very important issue of the fact that we do not know, or the government does not know, how much those things would be valued, because we do not have a competitive market that goes up and down and fluctuates according to the tastes and preferences of individuals.
So that brings up a super important topic, the price system, right? And
yes.
To put it in a nutshell, price is what somebody's willing to pay for something. And if you don't have this vast network, or any network of voluntary transactions and that information, you have no idea how much people value something. Therefore you cannot calculate an efficient allocation of resources. Like, for example, I'm always thinking, back to my job. I'm an engineer, and it's very difficult to come up with a product that people want on the market that is cost effective and will sell well and will sell good, and to come up with the most economical way of doing something. If there were no price constraints, we would just make something out of solid stainless steel or solid gold. Why not, right? There's no constraint on resources and on what something's going to cost. So why not make something the most expensive and efficient way? So prices drive all of that, because you are consuming valuable resources, things which people had poured their labor into, and that is not free. So the price system, that is what is able to drive and help efficiently allocate resources, including people's time. So that's sort of another foundation of free market capitalism.
Yes. The free market refines the work and the labor that people put in, so that it allows us to gain capital or wealth, and that wealth gives us any number of things. More things that we want, more time on your hands to do what you would like. I mean, just examining what was happening, let's say 500 years ago or 400 years ago, people laboring on a farm. Now farming has become, and of course no one would have leisure time. You would be waking up at the crack of dawn, and you would be heading inside as soon as the sun sets. And now farmers have technology, machinery, and they actually have the ability to sit down and read a book. Or they have Sundays or Saturdays off. So yeah, in a free society, we are able to properly gauge how producers can better supply demand. And this is another very, very commonly said, but often not very well understood idea of supply and demand. And do you want to describe that, Danny?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, supply and demand. So, there's a graph you can try to visualize, the X and the Y axis, and supply is, I always get this backwards, but supply and demand are opposite lines. So one is going up at a 45 or whatever slope it is, the other is going down, just as an oversimplification. And somewhere in the middle, those two lines meet, and that is called equilibrium. But you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Demand is just how much people want something, how much they're willing to pay, generally speaking. And supply is the other side of that coin. That is how much of a supply there is of something and how much people are willing to produce. So somewhere in the middle, those points are going to meet, and that is where you're going to get, that's called equilibrium. That is actually the most efficient possible point for any free market to be in, is where supply and demand meet, where at that point there is no excess of supply. In other words, you don't have people camping outside the store, and you also don't have items collecting dust on the shelf. You have equilibrium between those two items. And that's actually really the prime example of why capitalism, free market capitalism, is really the peak of market efficiency in terms of delivering value to people, is where you can reach that point. Because, here's the really profound, awesome thing, is that markets are naturally driven towards this point. Because if there's an excess of demand for something, and people are camping outside your store, suppliers are going to be incentivized to provide a certain item, a good or service. Likewise, if you have items sitting on the shelf, people are not going to produce as much because there's no money to be made. So markets naturally tend towards equilibrium. But here's the catch. You need to allow free voluntary trade to occur for this to happen. And it's kind of a self-evident truth. If you ask me, it's almost a tautology. Like, let people voluntarily decide what they want to buy, and bingo, all of a sudden people are provided with what they want, because people know what they want. People have subjective value preferences. So let them trade, and all of a sudden, wouldn't you know, they get what they want. I mean, it's almost like repeating yourself. It's a tautology in a sense.
There is, I think, a couple of important points to make. One of the biggest problems that people will indicate about, I think, human behavior overall is that, individuals are selfish, and capitalism is a reward of people's baser instincts, that idea of selfishness, that people will do what they want to do in spite of their fellow man who might be starving on the street. Now, in a free society, there is nothing to prevent, all things being equal, there's nothing to prevent, let's say on our island, from Danny doing his thing and me doing my own thing. So at that point in time, Danny's able to do whatever he wants. If Danny wants to, get fat and continue to eat coconuts and sleep out on the beach, he can do that if that's what he prefers. And if I want to, let's say, I want to be very slender, lean, fantastic physique,
You're painting images in people's heads.
Oh, is that inappropriate?
No, it's just that I will forever be the fat ass on the beach, and you're the muscular guy. But that's fine, actually. That's all right. That's actually 100% accurate. So
it's true. Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
So yeah, I mean, if I want to do that, then I'm able to do that. What ends up occurring, of course, or what the issue at hand is once we start to gain markets of scale, or a collection of people, let's say, now we've got 30 or 40 different individuals. What the complaint that those who are against capitalism, or at least I should say that are interested in a mixed economy or a planned economy, says that when people are self-interested, they will do things that will hurt their fellow man. So perhaps I might try to take all of the mangoes so no one can have them, and or I will jack up the price because I have a monopoly of power. And monopoly, I think, is a separate issue that we can that might actually grant a whole separate topic, or at least some of the perceived problems of capitalism. But in a sense, these are some of the natural things that people might imagine would happen in a capitalist society. But I would say that actually capitalism allows us to create a system that naturally works upon the selfishness of other people to force them to cooperate, because resources are scarce and there are opportunity costs. And for us to be able to do more things, to enjoy greater wealth, we need a buyer, and there needs, of course, to be a seller, like, me with my mangoes. If somebody, for instance, is interested in jacking up the price on all the mangoes like me, well, there is nothing to go and say that Danny gets into the business and starts to offer lower prices on mangoes, because they're out there in the world. You might not be quite as good at it, but you can offer it at a lower price. And consumers are interested in mangoes, but they're also interested in lower prices, because that means that they have more wealth to spend on whatever they want.
Yeah, so monopolies are inherently sort of unstable on their own. Interestingly enough, they always seem to pop up as soon as they get government assistance. But yeah, you illuminate an interesting point, and that is that the free market is sort of, people are going to laugh at this, but it's true. The free market is self-regulating in the sense that, you can only do what people are willing to pay for. Everybody has this idea in their head that the capitalist is just going to do whatever he wants and force everyone to comply. It's like, no, if people don't want it, they're not going to pay for it. So and to your point about human selfishness, I think of all things that you're going to base society around, why not harness basically the virtually unlimited resource of human self-interest and harness it for good, right? Like everybody thinks we need to just all become incredibly compassionate and society will run on that. And that would be a beautiful thing. I'm not against it at all, but that's an uphill battle. On the other hand, everybody wants to better their situation, and there's really nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly natural to want to improve your lot in life. So why not use that natural fuel, that motivation to improve yourself and your lifestyle to serve other people? Because that's what every trade is you're serving your fellow man and you are getting rewarded for it. So there's really nothing wrong with voluntary mutual trade, and, call it what you want, greed. As long as you're not stealing from other people, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being greedy, as long as it results in a peaceful, voluntary, mutually beneficial trade.
Right. Yeah. What economics seeks to do is to examine the world around us and the exchange of goods and services, even on the basic level of, services being labor. So economics is something that might inform a libertarian ethics, and that is, the idea that resources are scarce and that people are rational and that there is a relationship between supply and demand can inform ideas on how we should create policy or how we should structure a system of trade. But they work very much hand in hand. The libertarian, the prescriptive side of things, and the explicit side of things, the economic level. So what I'm getting at is that when we have issues like sort of self-evident observations of supply and demand and things like this, they are things that exist out in the world. They're not very controversial things, even though I've heard many economists say these sorts of things. But more and more, it seems like we steer away from these basic ideas because we muddle them with all sorts of mathematical equations and, hyperbolic situations and obscurantism that is really unnecessary. And coming back to some of these basic ideas and then moving forward allows us to really see how silly and how much of a facade and an artifice we are creating by delving into, new economics, Keynesian economics. And I don't want to introduce a new term without really giving it so much form, but Keynesian economics is antithetically opposed to the Austrian School of Economics, or a more classical idea that trade should be voluntary. And Keynesian economics is not an ethical treatment of things, but it does permit people or a government to come in and to correct for the misunderstandings or the quote-unquote irrationality, or what did he call it? The animal spirit is what Keynes called it. The animal spirit in businessmen and individuals. The government, Big Daddy, comes in and corrects for this sort of stuff. So necessarily Keynesian economics needs a government. And what we say as libertarians come in and say that is an unethical and immoral proposition. And that's why we prefer a free trade, an unplanned society that doesn't have a hand that is made up of human beings, a massive coercive force that says that we can do things better. And we don't think that that's the case. If people are selfish as individuals, why aren't they selfish as collectives?
Right. Who was it who said it was Mises, if we are to abandon the free market for mankind's moral failings, then we must also reject the state for the exact same reason. It's made up of the same people. But for those who don't know, Keynesianism is basically a cure to a problem that was government created in the first place. So everybody looked at the gyrations of the supposed free market, which I would argue are actually caused by government interference in the first place. But anyways, Keynesianism is the idea that you can basically have a counterbalance, so to speak, to the gross or the large-scale behavior of the free market. So using government tools like printing money and adjusting interest rates, basically artificially screwing with the economy, you can get a desired outcome. And of course, that's just a code word for political boondoggle, big bank bailouts, and basically anyone politically connected gets an unlimited spigot of government money. That's kind of what it boils down to in the real world application. But, I think we should probably dedicate an episode to the critiques of capitalism and really rooting out all of the misconceptions in detail.
Yeah, I think that you've got an idea there. So I think that it would be important, at least for some people, to consider that if we accept these basic fundamental principles, which is the self-ownership of the body and voluntary agreement to trade your labor, your fruits of your labor, and our ability to own items that exist out in the world, and also the idea of contracts, which is simply a voluntary exchange. All of these things that we've been talking about in other philosophical episodes, if you accept these, some of which are informed by observations out in the world, and I keep on saying this, people are rational, resources are scarce, all of these, supply and demand, all of these things, we observe those things, and we're able to also prescribe these ethical ideas of self-ownership, which is self-evident, and also the ownership of items for the nonviolent resolution of problems. Well, it really seems like the free market is a natural wellspring of possibilities, and also a natural outgrowth of these observations. It's just the best possible solution to what we have established at the very beginning of this podcast.
Yeah, it's not, people like to enshrine it. It's nothing more than voluntary human trade. I mean, it's funny that we have to defend it, right? Like having to defend voluntarism. It's just people peacefully cooperating, peacefully trading to better their lot in life. I mean, it's really that simple. And what we're espousing here is that it is the most efficient. It's already operating at peak efficiency. Anything you do to it is just a net loss. We're not saying that human trade is perfect, or, like you say, people are rational. And of course, you have that one guy listening like, no, people aren't rational. My mom does irrational things sometimes. We're not saying that everybody is perfectly rational 100% of the time. We're simply saying free trade.
That your mother is an exception.
I don't think my mom listens to the show. But in any case, we're saying that free trade is the best, most powerful engine for human prosperity. And by the way, while we're talking about capitalism, you can look up a comparison, a plotting of every country in the world. And if you dive down, you can look at states within countries and cities, etc. Every time you look, you see a positive correlation between economic freedom, that is, people's ability to trade freely, unhindered by government, and prosperity. It's no wonder that as long as you leave that engine of prosperity alone, you get the elimination of poverty, you get the serving of people's wants and needs, as well as many, many other metrics for human quality of life. As soon as you start screwing with that, as soon as you start imposing theft and coercion into the situation, well, gee golly, things turn out sour. It's just, that's a natural consequence of disobeying basic moral concepts. Don't steal, don't kidnap people for doing non-crimes. No victim, no crime. But it's really that simple.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you, I assume that you do, Danny, look at some of these, these economic freedom indicators, and you may have noticed that some of the countries that we believe that are heavily socialist, and I use that in quotations, or heavily centrally planned, actually have higher economic freedom when it's regarded by certain free market capitalist advocate groups. For instance, the Danish system is always espoused as being, the pinnacle, or the best economy that we have in the world. But when you look at the economic freedom indicator, I think the Danes are somewhere at 85, because they may have high taxes, but overall, when taking everything into consideration, they have less regulation than even the United States, which is somewhere around 83 point something. So when people like Bernie Sanders are saying we've got to emulate the Danes, Denmark, well, it's funny because he has no idea that actually has more free market trading than the United States even does. And he's touting the economics. Everyone's happy there. And happiness, I have a real issue with, how do you quantitate happiness? Everyone has their own little thing there. But even still, if you're going to take it at face value, the Danes being more happy, well, that properly correlates with their economic freedom indicator. If you really buy into that sort of stuff, Bernie's got it all wrong.
Yeah. As soon as you parse out all the details, you see immediately that all of their, basically anything good, all the prosperity is thanks to their free markets, and that may be a buildup of prosperity from the past when they had more liberal, open economies. But you can drill down as much as you want, but you're absolutely right. People will point to these countries with a very broad brush and say, oh, it's a socialist country. Really? Is everything there socialist? Compared to Venezuela, which is actually a legitimately socialist country, has the biggest oil reserves in the world, and people are going to jail for smuggling powdered milk. It's an absolute hellhole right now. So, yeah, you really drill down. I mean, this is a topic of passion of mine. Free markets and prosperity. If you want to eliminate poverty from the world, and this is potentially one of the most powerful reasons to support voluntaryism, anarcho-capitalism, as I like to call it, and many others do, is free markets destroy poverty. Capitalism is the most effective, efficient means to destroy poverty. And we do not need to have poverty in the world. Everyone thinks that it's just like this natural thing that we're always going to live with forever. No, we can live in a world without poverty. Just look at the continent of Africa. It's completely racked by oppressive governments and corruption, which are absolutely choking out the free market. And there's a reason why they are in poverty. So that I think is one of the most important implications. People forget that most of human history was poverty, and only the societies which experimented in free trade and individual rights and property rights managed to claw their way out of that.
And there are some people that will mention, well, even in our society, there are poor people. Okay, well, there are a couple of different factors at hand there. And as we've said before, there's quite a bit of government intervention here in America. We don't have a free market as pure as we are trying to describe it. In fact, there's no country that has that. But I would say a couple of things. If you look back even 150 years, the generation of capital has permitted people that have been walking to work now to drive to work. And, the rich and the poor are driving now. And the rich and the poor sit side by side in an airplane. And before, one would walk to work and the other would ride a carriage.
Yeah, poverty in America, really, come on. Not to make light of some people's legitimate situations, but to be poor in a first world country like the U.S. is to be a king mere 100, 200 years ago. There's no comparison at all. The amount of wealth, the average poor family in the United States, what is it? They've got multiple TVs, cell phones, cars, on a shockingly low amount of work, but that's thanks to the welfare state and a topic for another time.
Right. What can you possibly attribute the success of America and other countries to outside of capitalism and the generation of wealth? The whole reason why we have all this free time and luxury and culture that the culture is almost oppressive in other countries. The only thing they listen to is American music. All of this stuff, the embarrassment of wealth that is at our disposal, and perhaps that has affected our culture in negative ways. But I'm simply saying the amelioration of poverty has never been helped more, has never been forwarded more than a system of free trade. Socialism simply has not done that for any other country. Most of the socialist countries now were adopters of it later on in their statehood. All the Scandinavian countries adopted socialism at a much later time. The Danes, the Swedes, several of which were capitalists for a very long time, and that's where they saw the most growth. And just now, they're more, they are more controlled. Even still, they are not as, they're less government intervened than America. So I think we should probably wrap this up because there is so much to say about economics, and it is basic and it is fundamental to know about, but it is very deep and it has many other implications, ramifications, and there's a lot of myths to bust out there that we're going to have to dedicate one or two or several episodes. I'd love to have a couple of economists on to chat with as well. What do you think, Danny?
I actually potentially may have a communist lined up to debate us. I know that's maybe hyperbole, but it's good to get somebody from a completely opposite end of the spectrum. But yeah, we do have to dive down and address the criticisms. That's where it gets interesting, and that's what's important. So absolutely, I'd love to hear anybody's feedback on that.
Yes. As usual, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome criticism, we welcome feedback, and we want to hear from you, our listeners. The email is flagshipfreedompodcast@gmail.com, flagshipfreedompodcast@gmail.com. Now, before we wrap up, there is something that we've got actually a couple of questions from a listener named Jarrett. Hello, Jarrett. Thanks for listening. And he shares with us, what solutions do you have to some of the big issues we currently face? The one issue specifically that I am curious to hear your thoughts on are how you would fix the taxation process. This is under the scenario of fixing the current system. So I think he's saying that, given what we have right now, the Webster's 20-part dictionary that we have of the tax code, how do we fix it?
Yeah, it's terrifying, by the way. In setting up my business and dealing with taxes, it goes completely over my head. I can't even understand it. So yes, it's absolutely true. What we have is a complete nightmare. It's really unbelievable.
Okay, so I'm not an economist, and I've examined taxation on a couple of different levels. Obviously, both of us believe that taxation is theft. It goes beyond just the simple mean and the catchphrase. We do believe that it is an immoral thing. So it's kind of like saying, under slavery, how would you fix the slavery? Right. That's what that says to me. Under the current system of slavery that we have, how would we fix slavery? It's like, okay, there are libertarians out there, that are not anarcho-capitalists. They believe that the government should provide their security from foreign states, and both near and abroad, and then roads, and that's it. Okay, well, they believe that there should be a level of taxation, and typically that comes down to some type of flat tax. And it's a sales tax. Sometimes there's a flat income tax. Ron Paul wanted to abolish the income tax, and people called it voodoo economics. How does the government raise money if we abolish tax? Well, I mean,
that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole point, right? So, Jarrett, I think that in the interest of expediency, simplifying the tax code, if we were to say anything, would probably be very, very good, so that the layman, the small business, could understand it and knows where and how and when to pay these things, because people need specialized individuals, named accountants, to do this sort of thing. I mean, that's crazy. You shouldn't need to have to do that. But we say that the system itself is immoral of taxation, so it really feels schizophrenic to say that we'd like to fix the taxation process because it is akin to fixing an immoral system in the first place. We just simply say we want to get rid of it. Okay, next question, and I'll give this one to you on the outset. What would you do to propose about, or what would we do about climate change, Danny?
Well,
go on.
As with any environmental issue, and we need a full episode on this, but it's an issue of supposed property rights, diffuse property rights, things which we feel like all human beings sort of have a right to, even though they've never homesteaded, like clean air, etc., climate change, or whatever, depletion of the ozone. So in any case, when you can have clear, defined property rights, it's always helpful. But I'm personally of the opinion that there are common areas and that we're never going to have perfectly rigid boundaries. So I view environmental destruction as a form of aggression against all people. If you're dealing with something like, destroying the oceans or air, things which you couldn't possibly own. So in viewing those as a form of aggression, they would have to be dealt with as such. And I realize you can't have zero pollution. I mean, that's kind of impossible. So if there is one regulation, and I'm not saying that I'm at all an advocate for government or regulation, but the carbon tax or cap and trade, as they call it, again, not at all advocating that, but it does touch on the idea that if you're going to pollute some, maybe you would have to do something to mitigate or offset that harm. In any case, I think the first and most important thing we can do is view environmental destruction as an unacceptable behavior and assign responsibility to the parties affected, instead of what we have right now is basically government giving people a permission slip to do whatever the hell they want and giving a ban to everybody else. And oftentimes it ends up being, politically connected companies, etc. So I know that's not quite a solution, but at least viewing it through the right lens.
Well, okay, yeah. So a couple things to say, and I really want to say more about it, but I will leave a couple of things out there for you to consider, and then when we get to the environmental economics and environment in a free society, we can talk a little bit more about it. But I think that this question presupposes one thing and brings up another topic as well. But the idea of pollution as, tangible, quantitative amounts, physical things that people might dump, waste onto land. Well, that land is owned by someone, and that person can receive justice by, going to a court, going to a, agreed upon lawgiver or resolution, dispute center, whatever it might be in a free society. You're able to account for that particular action. It's not an externality that exists, simply by people being out there. If a company dumps waste on your property, you own that property. You have an interest in keeping it safe. Okay. Same thing goes, with overhunting. If you've got land and you've got deer that are out there, you don't want to overhunt and kill off all of your resources. You want to be a proper steward of your resources, and your resources being the animals. So, and then there, of course, are people out there that genuinely care about animals, and if you own the property, you can do whatever you want with them. But I think that people as rational beings would be not so interested in killing off their animals or allowing somebody to dump waste onto their land. Now, then you have that sort of the externality of, let's say, pollution through the air. If we're driving around, we create, harmful gases that damage the ozone. Well, I did post in our Facebook page that science and technology have an incredible way of solving problems, in the near future or even now. And it is often the case that technology costs a lot more than we wish it to because of, patents and legal fees and liability and all this sort of stuff. And some of that may or may not exist in a free society. But progress and technology is so important to our ability to solve the climate change solution. If you do believe it or if you don't, there's a what I posted on there was an article about how recently and, humorously enough, accidentally, that some scientists that were located in, we'll post it in the show notes, but scientists accidentally discovered an efficient process to turn CO2 into ethanol and to remove large amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere. This is something that actually happened, and they published the findings in a chemistry journal. So solutions in a free market do and can happen. But one final thing, I know we got to go, but it's important to note that with these really crazy, catastrophic problems that are granted to societies, or granted as, I shouldn't say lifeboat scenarios, but they're sort of they're catastrophic or apocalyptic events, whether it's alien attack. How will you solve this if it's a community issue, if it's a global issue, if it's an externality that cannot be costed upon somebody else? Well, I think that's what I think these questions end up coming down to. How do you solve catastrophes? And they'll use these catastrophes as examples of why anarchy, why a free society may not work. But it takes as a rule the lifeboat scenario, which I think is erroneous at best.
Yeah, you're using the exception to invalidate the general principle. Like, oops, I came up with one crazy situation.
Well, precisely, yes. But it's the whole idea that there are catastrophic issues that can occur, and that you can manipulate the masses in order to come together in times of war and so on and so forth. These have always been prime examples of ways that coercive forces have come to power through benign ways. This is why a lot of people that are climate change deniers, quote unquote, are very worried about it, because they believe that it is an agenda for which the left is using to leverage greater control over, let's say, the oil business. Which still to this day produces better and more efficient energy than any other kind of energy. So I really want to caution people in creating ethics by invalidating ethics by very strange and hyperbolic situations that we do not live in a normal day-to-day world. You can't create rules of extremity. Otherwise, life would be miserable if we constantly lived in, an environment that is always a lifeboat situation where we're always trying to save lives and this and that and the other thing. That's not how we live our lives. It's not how we live our day-to-day lives. So you can't create rules like that. So that's what that question, I think, implies. And then finally, this is kind of a throwaway. I think we're so close to the election, it might not matter to you, Jarrett, but out of the current politicians, who would be your dream candidate for president and vice president? I mean, I'm a fan. I'm still a fan of Ron Paul, and I always will be. I think he's done more for the libertarian movement than many other people. He's popularized it in a way that it hadn't been since the 1970s, since the inception. Even though the ideas have been around for a long time, Ron Paul's the man. I mean, he captured the hearts and minds of people, and the man's 80 years old. That's a remarkable thing. And people could say the same about Bernie if they're a big socialist, but I'm not. And Ron Paul would be a dream candidate if he'd be willing to run. But he's an older fella. He's still spry. He's still smart. He's still with it. But, I like Rand quite a bit, even though he ran as a Republican. And I think that he's more extreme and more interested in libertarianism than I would say most of his other fellows, and more probably than he says himself. Gary Johnson's not really a dream candidate of mine, and I think I've expressed that before. Danny?
Yeah, Ron Paul is actually now not really shy about it anymore. He is a voluntarist or an anarchist. He just doesn't quite say it explicitly. So he's a great guy, but as with the taxation question, I really, especially given the current climate, I just can't answer it, because it's just rearranging the chess tables, the chess pieces on the Titanic that's sinking. Like, I'm not interested in any slave master whatsoever. In fact, I'm going to go out today and put up some political signs in front of the throngs of the Trump and Clinton signs.
Oh, you fiend.
I am. I'm going to go laser cut them. They say taxation is theft. Have the anarchy symbol, and say nobody 2016. So that's how I'm going to answer that one.
You're so controversial.
Yeah, it's just my young rebellious attitude. I'll get over it soon.
Yeah, I think you will. All right. Well, I think that's all we have, folks. So, as always, this is Flagship Freedom, the podcast that places you on the front line of the war of ideas. We hope you join us for our next battle, but we enjoyed this one. I think we're going to have a lot more interesting topics in the coming days, things that go deeper and deeper into the wonderful and fascinating ideas in which we are developing. Write us. Come on our show. We love guests. We love you guys commenting on our Facebook page. We encourage you to do that. So, that's all for now. Danny, you got anything else to say?
No, thank you very much for sticking with us to the end, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take care, everyone.
And that one desire is you. And I know nobody else ain't gonna do.